"25 years is enough," my husband said, his voice cutting through the music. "I want someone younger. Be out of the apartment tomorrow." The room went dead silent. The band stopped mid-note. Champagne froze halfway to lips. That's how my 25th wedding anniversary began, with a public divorce announcement. I remember gripping the edge of the table, so hard my knuckles turned white. At first I thought it was a cruel joke, the kind you fix with a nervous laugh. But the look on Mark's face told me it wasn't. He was calm, certain, pleased. Every pair of eyes in the ballroom swung toward me. Pity, shock, curiosity, all of it crushing down at once. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered, "Oh my God." I heard it, but my heart was louder. Mark raised his glass as if to finish the toast. "To new beginnings," he said. That's when something in me snapped. If he wanted a scene, I would give him one, but not the kind he expected. I walked to the microphone, heels steady, voice cold enough to make the chandeliers shiver. "Funny you should say that, Mark," I began. "Because I have something to say too." He turned toward me, confused now. I smiled. Just a small, sharp smile, the kind that comes right before truth slices through arrogance. "The apartment you just told me to leave," I said, pausing as the crowd leaned in, "is mine." Gasps rippled like wind through water. And just like that, the man who'd spent 25 years controlling every narrative lost the microphone and the room. He turned toward me, his face calm, rehearsed, like a man giving a business presentation, and added, "Be out of the apartment tomorrow." That was the moment I realized it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a drunk man saying something stupid. He meant every word. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. My hands were trembling under the table, but my face stayed still. It was strange, the way silence could feel so loud. Every sound in the room vanished. Only the steady pounding of my heart filled my ears. In that frozen moment, 1,000 memories flashed before me. The years I'd spent holding that man's hand through everything. Through his failed ventures, through his illnesses, through the nights when we couldn't afford more than soup for dinner. The nights I waited up for him while he worked late, believing every "I'm almost home." The sacrifices that had built our life, my career on pause, my savings poured into his dreams. And now, 25 years later, he was discarding me like yesterday's news in front of everyone we knew. I wanted to disappear. But humiliation has a way of turning to steel when you least expect it. He lifted his glass again, as if sealing the deal. "To new beginnings," he said, smirking slightly. That was when I stood up. The murmur in the room stopped again. The air shifted. I could feel my sister's hand brush mine under the table, pleading for me to sit, to stay quiet. But something inside me snapped. No tears, no begging, no scene. Just calm, absolute clarity. He had made a declaration. Now it was my turn. I walked slowly to the microphone, the one the DJ had used to announce our first dance an hour earlier. My heels echoed against the marble floor. Every step felt like reclaiming ground I didn't even know I'd lost. When I reached the mic, my voice was steady, quiet, but it carried. "Funny you should say that, Mark," I began. "Because I have something to say too." He turned toward me, his confidence flickering for the first time that night. The audience, our friends, our family, his co-workers, watched us like it was theatre. I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile I used to give him. It was smaller, colder, the kind of smile a woman gives when she's finally done pretending. "For 25 years," I said, "I believed in building things together, a home, a future, a life. I thought that's what marriage meant." I paused, scanning the crowd. "But it seems tonight you've forgotten a few details." I looked straight into his eyes. "The apartment you just asked me to leave," I tilted my head slightly, "is mine." Gasps rippled across the room. Mark blinked, confused, as I continued. "And the cars, the accounts, The business office lease you brag about. You signed every single one under my name. Remember when you said, "It's just paperwork, honey"? I leaned closer to the mic. Well, I did. The room erupted in whispers. Someone stifled a laugh. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply placed my champagne glass down and said, "So if anyone's moving out tomorrow, it won't be me." Mark's face drained of colour. He tried to speak, but I held up my hand. "One more thing," I said softly. "If you're looking for someone younger, I truly hope she enjoys paying my mortgage." The crowd couldn't hold back anymore. There were gasps, awkward laughs, even applause from a few guests who'd clearly been waiting years to see him humbled. I stepped away from the mic, lifted my chin, and turned toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear him calling my name, but I didn't look back. Not once. As I walked past the tables, someone whispered, "Good for her." Another said, "She handled that like a queen." But I didn't feel powerful. Not yet. Underneath the calm exterior, my heart was breaking. 25 years of memories unraveling in one night. When I stepped out into the cool night air, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The music had stopped. The laughter was gone. And for the first time in years, I realized something: he might have walked out of my life that night, but I was the one walking away with my dignity intact. And that was worth far more than anything he ever gave me. After that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty space beside me, the dent in the pillow where his head used to be. It's strange how fast something that once felt permanent can turn into a hollow shape of what it used to hold. The morning light spilled through the curtains, catching the edge of our wedding photo on the dresser. 25 years earlier, I was a girl with stars in her eyes and calluses on her hands. Mark wasn't rich, not even close. He had charm, though, the kind that made you believe struggle would be temporary and love would make everything else easy. I met him when I was 27, working as a receptionist at a small architectural firm downtown. He came in one day with rolled-up blueprints and a smile that could light up an entire building. Back then, we didn't have much. We rented a small apartment that smelled like coffee and paint thinner because he used the living room as his drafting space. We ate pasta 3 nights a week because it was cheap, and we laughed about it like it was a grand adventure. He'd sketch buildings on napkins and tell me, "One day you'll live in one of these." And I believed him, because back then, I believed in him. When he decided to start his own design company, I was the one who pushed him to do it. I remember selling my grandmother's ring to cover the first few months of rent for his tiny office. He promised he'd buy me a bigger diamond one day. That diamond never came, but the bills did. Mountains of them. So I took extra work. Day shifts at the firm, night shifts managing books for a diner. Sometimes I'd come home to find him asleep at his desk, surrounded by crumpled papers and half-finished sketches. I'd kiss his forehead and whisper, "You'll make it. I know you will." And he did. Eventually. The business grew, clients came, and soon his name was on glossy brochures. But as his success grew, his gratitude faded. He started saying things like, "You wouldn't understand how stressful this job is," when I asked if he wanted dinner. Or, "You don't need to work anymore, just focus on the house." I thought it was a compliment, until I realized what it really meant: step aside. That's how quiet erasure begins. Not with cruelty, but with small dismissals that stack up until you no longer recognize the woman in the mirror. I went from partner to assistant, from confidant to housekeeper, from wife to background noise. Still, I stayed, because that's what loyalty meant to me. I told myself it was just a phase, that love had seasons. And in every cold one, I kept the fire going, even if I was the only one feeding it. When his mother fell ill, I was the one who drove her to every doctor's appointment. When he forgot birthdays, I was the one who sent the cards in his name. When he started coming home later and later, I told myself it was just long hours at work. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. The man I once called my best friend had started treating me like an obligation, and the more invisible I became, the louder my silence felt. There was one night, maybe a year before the anniversary party, when we went out to dinner with his colleagues. He was laughing, charming, the center of attention. And when someone joked that he'd married up, he smiled and said, "Maybe once, but now she's the one keeping up with me." Everyone laughed. I did too. But later in the car, my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't find the seatbelt. He didn't notice. He was too busy texting someone. That night, when he fell asleep, I went to the kitchen and made tea. I sat in the dark for hours, thinking about how a person can share your bed for decades and still feel like a stranger. How you can give someone your youth, your strength, your dreams, and one day, wake up realizing they've taken it all and forgotten to say thank you. It wasn't until later that I found the first real crack, the one that couldn't be ignored. A faint scent of perfume on his shirt. Not mine. Something expensive, sweet, young. He said it was a client's wife who'd hugged him at a meeting. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But when he turned away, I saw a lipstick stain on his collar. Nude pink. A color I'd never wear. I should have confronted him that night. But instead, I washed the shirt. I told myself maybe I was imagining things, because admitting the truth would mean facing the reality that the man I'd built my life around had already checked out of it. The next morning, he brought me flowers. Tulips, my favorite. He smiled and kissed my cheek, like nothing had happened. And that's when I understood something painful but true. Men like Mark don't confess. They perform. So I let him perform. I let him believe I was still blind. I smiled through the dinners, the work events, the practiced hand-holding. But behind every polite smile, something inside me was shifting, slowly, quietly, like tectonic plates preparing for an earthquake. Because deep down, I knew this story wasn't going to end with tears. It was going to end with truth. And when that truth finally came crashing down, on the night of our anniversary, it didn't destroy me. It exposed him. It's funny how betrayal doesn't arrive all at once. It doesn't burst through the door or shout its name. It drips one quiet drop at a time until you're standing in a flooded room, wondering when you stopped hearing the leak. After that night with the lipstick stain, things between Mark and me fell into a strange rhythm. He was sweeter than before, almost attentive, the kind of attention that comes from guilt, not love. He started bringing home gifts for no reason. Scarves, perfume, dinner reservations. All the things he used to say we couldn't afford when we were young. He called it spoiling me. I called it covering tracks. His phone became an extension of his hand. He'd take it into the bathroom, hold it face down on the counter, and flinch when it buzzed. Once, he fell asleep on the couch, and when I reached over to cover him with a blanket, a message lit up the screen. It said, "I miss you," counting down the hours. No name, just a heart emoji. My stomach twisted. I stood there in the dark, staring at the phone, my hand trembling over it like it was fire. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Because when you've lived with someone for 25 years, you don't need proof to recognize absence. The next morning, he was extra cheerful. He kissed my cheek, called me sweetheart, and left early for work. And that's when I knew for sure he wasn't trying to hide a mistake. He was living a double life. For weeks, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. But the universe has a cruel way of confirming what your heart already knows. One afternoon, I stopped by his office to drop off some files he'd forgotten at home. The receptionist looked surprised to see me. "Oh, Mrs. Miller, I thought you were coming later." "With him?" "With him?" I repeated. She blinked, realizing she'd said too much, then stammered. "Oh, I must have been mistaken." But the way her voice cracked told me everything. Through the glass doors, I saw her the assistant. Tall, blonde, no more than 30. She was laughing at something on Mark's phone, leaning closer than necessary, touching his arm in that casual, practiced way women do when they know they're being watched. I didn't confront him that day. I simply walked out. My heart didn't break. It hardened. That night, I cooked dinner as usual. When he came home, I asked how his day went. Busy, he said, loosening his tie. You wouldn't believe how much paperwork piles up. I smiled, handed him his plate, and said, I bet. He never realized that was the first lie we both agreed to. Weeks passed like that. I went through the motions, quiet, composed, watching him spin stories like threads, fragile, glittering, and easily snapped. He thought I was blind, but I was just collecting truth. One evening we were at a dinner party hosted by one of his clients' wealthy people. Expensive wine. The kind of event where everyone performs happiness like a script. Mark stood across the room, surrounded by women laughing at his jokes. I watched him hold his glass, confident, charming, the perfect husband in public. But when his assistant brushed past and slipped a note into his pocket, I saw it. I saw everything. Later that night, when we got home, I waited until he fell asleep. Then I checked the jacket pocket. Inside was a small folded piece of paper that read, Same place tomorrow, 8 p.m. No name, no signature, just confirmation. I sat there for hours, staring at that note under the lamplight. It didn't feel like heartbreak anymore. It felt like awakening. The next day, instead of confronting him, I followed him. He said he was meeting a client for dinner. I knew exactly which restaurant, the same one where we used to go on anniversaries when money was tight, but love was enough. He parked 2 blocks away. I waited in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Then she arrived. The assistant, smiling, her hair down, wearing the same perfume I'd smelled on his shirt months ago. He stood up when she walked in. They hugged, the kind of hug that lingers. Then they sat down and ordered wine. Our wine. I didn't cry. Not there. Not even when he brushed her hair back from her face like he used to do to me. I just watched. Quietly. Like someone watching the final scene of a movie they already knew the ending to. When I drove home, I didn't feel rage. I felt something colder. A kind of stillness that comes only when you realize the person who betrayed you isn't worth the pain you thought they'd cause. That night, I stood in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd planned our first home, where we'd once danced barefoot on New Year's Eve. I looked around at the life I had built with my hands, and I whispered to myself, he doesn't get to take this from me too, because that's what betrayal does. It tries to take your identity, your worth, your sanity. But I wasn't going to let him win that quietly. So I made a decision. I wouldn't confront him at home. I wouldn't cry in private or beg him to explain himself. If he wanted to humiliate me behind closed doors, I would return the favor in the one place he couldn't hide, in front of everyone who thought our marriage was perfect. And that's when I started planning the anniversary party, the one that would become the stage for his undoing. The night of our anniversary came faster than I expected. Funny thing about time, it flies when you're pretending nothing's wrong. For weeks, I moved like a ghost through the house, smiling when I needed to, planning when I had to, acting like everything was fine when everything inside me was quietly breaking apart. But I wasn't planning a celebration. I was planning closure. Mark thought it was his idea. He called it a milestone worth showing off. He wanted a grand party, champagne, live music, a ballroom full of people who would pat him on the back and call him the perfect husband. And I agreed, almost too eagerly. He thought my compliance meant surrender. He didn't realize it meant strategy. I booked the ballroom at the same hotel where we'd celebrated his company's 10th anniversary years ago, back when I still believed his success was our success. I handled every detail. The invitations, the catering, the guest list, even the microphone. A week before the party, I found a photo tucked inside his briefcase. Her again, the assistant. This time they weren't hiding. They were at a lake house I didn't recognize, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. He looked younger, freer. I placed the photo back exactly where I found it. Let him keep his secret. It would make what came next even sweeter. The night of the event, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, adjusting the silver necklace he'd once given me for our 15th anniversary. I hadn't worn it in years. That necklace was a symbol not of love, but of everything I'd poured into this marriage. Every quiet sacrifice, every broken promise disguised as compromise. When I walked into the ballroom, the lights were golden, soft, forgiving. Guests were already sipping champagne, laughing, taking photos. I smiled at every face that turned toward me, greeting people I hadn't seen in years. Everyone said the same thing. "You look radiant." I thanked them, even though I felt nothing close to radiant. Mark was in his element, working the crowd. His hand rested casually on the small of the assistant's back. She was there, of course, but introduced as his colleague. I played along. I always had. As the night went on, the speeches began. His business partner made a toast, full of inside jokes and exaggerated praise. Then my sister spoke, short and sweet, her eyes darting toward me with silent understanding. And finally, it was Mark's turn. He walked to the mic, glass in hand, smiling that same polished smile that had fooled everyone except me. 25 years, he began, his voice confident, smooth. That's a long time to spend with one person. Longer than some people manage these days. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. I felt my pulse, slow, steady, calm. Then he said the line that changed everything. 25 years is enough. I think it's time to move on. I want someone younger. Be out of the apartment tomorrow. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. Then I saw it, the smirk. The satisfaction of a man who thought public humiliation made him powerful. The room went dead silent. You could hear the clinking of a spoon dropped somewhere near the back. All eyes turned to me. He stood there, smug, swirling his champagne like it was just another speech. He thought I'd cry, or run, but I didn't. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and then very slowly I stood up. The murmurs started. I could feel the weight of every stare in the room as I walked toward the microphone. My heels echoed against the floor, each step measured, deliberate. When I reached the mic, I smiled politely at the crowd. "Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight," I said softly, "and thank you, Mark, for reminding me why this day matters so much." A nervous chuckle ran through the audience. Mark's smirk faltered just a little. I turned to him. "Funny, though," I continued. "You said I should be out of the apartment tomorrow, but there's something you seem to have forgotten." I paused, let the silence stretch. "The apartment is mine." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I saw Mark blink the first real flicker of panic behind his polished facade. I took a step closer to the mic. "And not just the apartment," I said, my voice steady now, cold but controlled. "The cars, the accounts, even the company office lease, all in my name. Every contract you've ever signed, I countersigned. Every loan you took, I backed. You might have forgotten that." His face turned pale. The assistant shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting around the room. I smiled, not the kind of smile born from victory, but from freedom. "I spent 25 years supporting your dreams, Mark. And while you were busy chasing someone younger, I was busy protecting everything we built from you." The room erupted. Laughter, gasps, even applause from people who'd clearly been waiting to see him fall. Mark tried to speak, stammering something about misunderstanding, but I wasn't done. "One last thing," I said, raising my glass. "You said you wanted someone younger. I truly hope she enjoys paying my mortgage." And with that, I clinked my glass lightly against the mic, set it down, and walked away. The sound of my heels faded under a wave of murmurs and whispers. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. As I stepped outside into the night, the cold air hit my face, sharp and clean. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Behind me, through the glass doors, I could see Mark frozen where I'd left him, surrounded by the people who once admired him, now whispering behind their hands. The assistant slipped quietly toward the exit, her face flushed. I didn't look back. I simply straightened my shoulders, walked toward my car, and whispered to myself, "He ended a marriage tonight. I started my life again." By the next morning, the city seemed quieter. Or maybe it was just me, the calm that follows a storm you've been waiting on for years. I woke up alone, sunlight spilling across the bed, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of pretending. There were no morning texts from Mark asking about breakfast, no sound of him rushing to shower, no excuses about meetings or deadlines. Just silence, clean, peaceful silence. My phone, however, was far from quiet. By 9 a.m., it was vibrating non-stop. Messages, missed calls, notifications from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, word had spread faster than the champagne had spilled. One video in particular, the moment I told him the apartment is mine, had made its way onto social media. Someone at the party had filmed the entire thing. And now, everyone was watching. I should have been embarrassed. But instead, I laughed softly, disbelievingly, because somehow the humiliation he meant for me had become his own. The headlines were brutal. Architect publicly dumped by wife on 25th anniversary. Businessman's affair exposed in toast gone wrong. She owned everything including his pride. I made coffee, scrolled through the messages, and let it all wash over me. Some were from friends offering sympathy. Others were from people pretending to care, hoping for gossip. And then there were the ones from women strangers who wrote things like, "You're my hero," or "That's how you take your power back." But in between the floods of messages, there was one from Mark. It was short. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. He showed up later that afternoon anyway, pounding on the door like the world owed him an audience. When I opened it, he looked nothing like the man who'd stood on that stage last night. His hair was uncombed, his tie loose, eyes bloodshot. "Can we talk inside?" he said. I crossed my arms. "About what?" He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "About what happened. You blindsided me." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the audacity. "Blindsided you," I repeated. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we know. You called me old and told me to leave my apartment. You made a spectacle out of my life, Mark." He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. "And the best part," I added quietly, "you thought you'd get away with it." He exhaled shakily. "Look, things got complicated. I didn't mean for it to happen like that. You embarrassed me too, you know." The words almost made me laugh again. "Embarrassed you?" I said. "Mark, you embarrassed yourself." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea what this has done to my reputation? Clients are cancelling meetings. Investors are backing out. Everyone's treating me like a joke." I looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, because the man standing in front of me wasn't powerful anymore. He was small, weak, afraid. He'd built his image on arrogance, and when it crumbled, there was nothing left behind it. "I warned you once," I said softly. "Don't build something on lies. It always collapses." He stared at me, eyes glossy with frustration. "You can't just cut me out of everything. Half of what we own is in my name," I interrupted, "legally, officially, and permanently." He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he just ran a hand through his hair and muttered, "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "I finally did." He left, without another word. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like punctuation, the kind that ends a very long, painful chapter. For a while, I didn't move. I just stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of my own house, my house, and let the peace settle in. But peace is rarely permanent when pride is involved. By the end of the week, he was everywhere again, not in person, but in whispers. His new girlfriend, the assistant, had taken to social media, posting cryptic messages about bitter ex-wives who can't move on. She even posted a photo of herself at what looked like the same lake house from before, captioned, "New beginnings." People took sides, as they always do. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't need defending. It just needs time. And time was already working in my favor. 2 weeks later, I received an email from one of Mark's old clients, a woman named Denise. She wrote, "I saw what happened. You handled it with grace. If you ever want to work with an interior consultant, I'd love your input. You've got the kind of composure that people trust." It made me smile because I'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen for who I was, not who I belonged to. And slowly, life began to take shape again. My shape. I started volunteering at a community art center. I reconnected with friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Evenings were quiet but peaceful. The kind of peace that doesn't feel empty, it feels earned. But peace doesn't stop people like Mark from trying one last time to rewrite history. A month later, he reached out again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was a letter. "I made a mistake. I let my ego ruin everything. Can we talk over dinner? Just one evening. Please." For a long moment, I considered it. Not because I wanted him back, but because part of me wanted to look him in the eye and say the words I should have said years ago. And when I finally agreed to meet, I didn't realize it would be the night I'd deliver the calmest, most final ending of all. The restaurant he chose was one of those places where everything gleamed. Polished marble floors, low amber light, and a pianist playing something slow enough to disguise the silence between people who no longer love each other. When I walked in, Mark was already there, sitting at a corner table, twisting his wedding ring between his fingers. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. It was the first time I'd seen him without his armor. No audience, no spotlight, no one to impress. He stood when he saw me. "Margaret," he said softly, his voice careful, almost rehearsed. "You look beautiful." I gave a polite smile. "Flattery won't change the ending, Mark." We sat. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of clinking glasses and murmured conversations filled the space. Finally, he said, "I didn't mean for things to go that way. I lost control of the moment." "The moment," I repeated. "You stood up in front of 50 people and threw away 25 years of marriage. That wasn't a moment, Mark. That was a decision." He winced. I was angry, confused. "About what? Having everything you ever wanted?" He sighed, running a hand down his face. "You don't understand, Margaret. Somewhere along the way, we lost each other." I stared at him, calm, unmoving. "No, you lost yourself. I was right where I'd always been next to you." He looked down. I thought she made me feel alive again. There it was. The confession. The truth dressed up like justification. "And now?" I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. "She's gone." I didn't respond. He kept talking, voice cracking now. "She left. Said I wasn't who she thought I was. Said she didn't sign up for all this drama. She blocked my number. Moved out of her apartment. It's all over." I folded my hands neatly on the table. "You thought she loved you, didn't you?" He nodded miserably. I tilted my head slightly. "She didn't love you, Mark. She loved your reputation. And when I took that away, she saw you for what you are, ordinary." He blinked, stung. I leaned in slightly. "You once told me perception is everything. You built your life on that idea. Well, congratulations. You're finally perceived exactly as you deserve." He exhaled shakily. "You've changed." "I told you that already," I said. "I just never told you why." I reached into my bag, and slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were copies of the loan documents, contracts, and property titles, everything that bore my name instead of his. He stared at them, confused. "What's this?" "The end of your leverage," I said quietly. "You tried to humiliate me publicly. You tried to erase me from my own story. So now, I'm erasing you from mine." He flipped through the papers, panic creeping into his expression. "You're taking everything?" "No," I said. "I'm taking back what was already mine." The waiter appeared with wine. I waved it away. "I didn't agree to dinner to punish you," I said softly. "I agreed because closure deserves witnesses." His brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" I smiled faintly. "You once said you wanted someone younger. I hope you meant it, because the woman you humiliated me for, she filed a harassment complaint against your firm. She's suing you for emotional distress." He froze. "What?" "And because your business name is still linked to my accounts, the firm's legal team contacted me this morning." I leaned back, watching his color drain. "They wanted to know if I'd like to cooperate with the investigation." I said yes. His jaw clenched. "You wouldn't." "Wouldn't I?" I interrupted softly. "After what you did? After the way you tore our life apart to feel 20 again?" He swallowed, words failing him. The pianist shifted to a slower song. The air between us thickened with unspoken things. "Finally," he whispered, "I never meant to hurt you." "That's the problem," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You never mean it, but you always do." He stared at me then, eyes glassy, desperate. "What do you want from me?" I took a deep breath. "Nothing. That's the beauty of it. For once, you have nothing I need." I stood up slowly, gathering my purse. Before I walked away, I placed one last envelope on the table, smaller, cleaner, with my lawyer's seal across it. His eyes widened. "What's this?" "Divorce papers," I said. "Signed. Final. You don't have to pretend to love me anymore, and I don't have to pretend you're worth forgiving." I turned to leave, but paused just long enough to add, "You wanted freedom, Mark. You just never imagined how lonely it would feel when you finally had it." Outside, the night air felt lighter, crisp and unburdened. The city lights shimmered across the street like quiet applause. For the first time, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. Peace. I didn't look back as I walked away, but I didn't have to. I could feel it, the silence behind me, the sound of a man finally realizing he'd lost something money could never buy back. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, like a space finally breathing again after years of suffocation. I looked down at my reflection in the glass. Older, yes, but stronger too. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Revenge isn't loud. It's silent. It's the sound of a door closing behind peace." In the weeks that followed, my life became beautifully quiet. No slammed doors, no anxious waiting for footsteps in the hallway. Just the hum of the morning coffee maker and the sound of my own breathing, steady, unhurried, mine. For the first time in decades, my days didn't revolve around someone else's moods. There were no calendars filled with his meetings, no dinners dictated by his schedule, no small talk crafted to make him feel important. The silence that used to terrify me now felt like home. People talk about revenge like it's a fire, hot, consuming, dangerous. But they're wrong. Real revenge is peace. It's quiet. It's the simple act of living well after someone tried to convince you that you couldn't. A month after I signed the divorce papers, I changed the locks on the apartment. Not out of spite, but out of protection for my sanity, for my space, for the woman who had finally stopped apologizing for existing. I donated half his clothes to charity. The other half, I boxed and left at his office with a note that said, "The past is ready for pickup." I started volunteering at a local women's centre. On my first day there, a young woman asked me, "Were you ever married?" I smiled. "Yes," I said. Once, to someone who taught me everything I needed to know about myself the hard way. She didn't ask for details, and I didn't give any. Some stories don't need retelling. They just need transforming. Mark tried to contact me a few times after the divorce went public. He called, emailed, even sent flowers, once red roses, the same kind he used to bring home after every argument, as if petals could erase pain. This time, I didn't even open the card. I handed the bouquet to a neighbor and said, "They'll look better on your table." Then one evening, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short. "You won, Margaret." I stared at it for a while before replying. "No, Mark. I healed. That's different." He never responded. And that was the last I ever heard from him. Some nights, I still think about the girl I used to be, the one who believed love meant endurance, that silence was noble, that loyalty was the same as losing yourself slowly. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her that kindness isn't measured by how much pain you can absorb. That love, real love, doesn't demand erasure as proof of devotion. There's a freedom that comes with losing everything you thought you couldn't live without and realizing you never needed it to begin with. Spring came early that year. The air was soft again, the city forgiving. I took long walks through the park near the lake, the same one where Mark once promised me forever. Funny how forever always sounds smaller when you finally outgrow it. One morning, as I sat on a bench sipping coffee, a couple walked past laughing, holding hands, full of that bright, fragile hope only new love carries. For a moment, I felt something warm, not bitterness, not longing, just gratitude. Because I had loved once, truly, and survived it. Because the pain had ended, but the strength had stayed. That night, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered below, endless and alive. I thought about that night at the anniversary party, how my voice didn't shake, how my hands stayed steady, how for once in my life, I didn't let someone else narrate my story. He had tried to humiliate me, but all he did was hand me a microphone. And I used it to reclaim everything he'd forgotten: my dignity, my worth, my voice. Some stories end with fireworks. Mine ended with quiet light, steady, constant, warm. I keep the signed divorce papers in a small box at the back of my closet. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder that endings aren't failures. They're beginnings in disguise. Before bed, I sometimes whisper a small prayer, not for Mark, not even for forgiveness, but for peace. Because peace, I've learned, is the most expensive thing you can own, and the only thing truly worth keeping. And if I could go back to that night, standing under those golden lights, hearing him declare his freedom in front of everyone, I'd still take the mic. I'd still smile. And I'd still say the same thing. The apartment is mine. Then I'd raise my glass, not to revenge, not to victory, but to survival, to every woman who's ever been told she's too old, too soft, too finished to start over. Because the truth is, I didn't lose a husband that night. I found myself. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest ending of all.